In Sunday's video, we discussed the importance of remaining true to the ideal inner feeling beyond appearances. We also discussed why desire means already having, which brings us into that ideal feeling, and how unnecessarily judging by appearances could result in one gaslighting themselves when it comes to that inner feeling. So let's go deeper into this. Why would a person self-gaslight by appearances? Well, not intentionally. These are only beliefs about self brought to awareness to be released. For example, we recently discussed perfectionism, which can be a form of self-gaslighting, where a person unnecessarily looks to appearances for approval and validation of their inherent perfection. I'll link in the description to that video, which discusses releasing identification to that belief to enjoy your creative expressions, relationships, or whatever as a result. These areas are then enjoyed as a joyous expression rather than using them to prove the point of inherent perfection. So now the feeling of the reality which is ideal to you being true now causes you to operate authentically and automatically when relating with others. It is also from this state where others show up in a mutually harmonious way as a reflection of that state. Now, on this channel, we emphasize that the inner feeling is linked to the one and universal inner cause of the phenomena of life. And so at every moment during interactions or even outside of interactions with others, we have a choice to let beliefs of the past that are not ideal in relation to them dictate the inner feeling, or we can consciously choose the inner feeling that would be ideal, from which all relationships show up automatically and ideally in our lives from that premise. Now, William Walker Atkinson explains a number of effects of being this way in his wonderful book, Mind Power: The Secret of Mental Magic. He says, "You will readily see from what has been said that the personal atmospheres of persons depend on the character of their mental states, and are the results of the mental currents emanating from them. Every person has their own mentative aura, or body of radiant mentative energy, which flows from them in all directions. These mentative atmospheres affect the people with whom one comes in contact. You know people who seem to carry with them an atmosphere of feeling which affects a room full of people or even a building." So now when we look at personal atmospheres, we see it's not dependent on external factors. Rather, it is from the inner feeling, what appears to emanate from us, be it visible body language, communication, subcommunication, or mentative aura. These are all effects of the mental state. Many years of observation and study on myself and others who had exhibited a personal atmosphere which we could call an ideal mental state revealed their psychology. Their psychology was not one of attempting to say or do things to get the other person to say or do whatever. Rather, they automatically get an ideal response, and not in a way that was manipulative, but rather one that built a meaningful relationship both ways. This was a result of them accepting that their ideal state of mind was a natural way of being, regardless of appearances. And thus they never, and perhaps they once did, self-gaslight when it comes to appearances in relation to their inner ideal feeling. Now, to further elaborate the points mentioned thus far, let's visit one of my favorite books on subconscious belief patterns called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion by Dr. Robert Cialdini. He wrote this book to educate the consumer as to what was going on within them that was influencing their buying decisions. It was based on 3 undercover years applying for and training at used car dealerships, fundraising organizations, and telemarketing firms to observe real-life situations of persuasion. In his book, he discussed what was observed as beliefs of reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, and scarcity that were influential aspects in relation to decisions. Now, it's important to acknowledge also that he went on to release a new and expanded version of the book, discussing another one which he calls unity. So these are inner programs that if a person is identified with in relation to information, it influences their behavior. And so we want to bring awareness to what state we consciously choose to occupy, and also why is it that a person would fluctuate into different states. Let's explore these and relate them to our conversation today. First, we have reciprocity. He found that many people hold beliefs where they return favors automatically, as in if a person does something for them, they tend to return the favor in some shape or form, and this continues throughout the relationship. Then we have commitment and consistency. This is where he observed the belief playing out where a person commits to something, and after they commit, they find it easier to commit to what they would consider as bigger commitments with the other person. Then we have social proof. This is where one looks around to see what others are doing and adjusts their behaviors accordingly. They may even form conclusions, like for example, if someone has a lot of people interested in them, that they are more authoritative in a certain regard, which may or may not be actually true, yet this belief causes them to think so automatically if identified with. Which is related to our next point, which actually for the intent and purpose of our conversation today, I want to relate our discussion to social proof and the next one, which is authority. This is the belief where people trust those who they perceive as authority figures at times without question. Then we have liking. This is where if one likes someone, they establish a rapport with them where there's an openness to suggestions from them. Then we have scarcity. This is where some tend to value things more if they are rare or in short supply. We see this when inventory is low on products, for example, or if they're sold out. A person might, as a result, want to buy it more and be willing to pay more, or even go further out of their way to acquire the product or service. Then we have unity. This is where we see being in a group or tribe creates a shared sense of identity and unity from which those who are part of the group are open to suggestions shared as they feel more comfortable in the environment. It's a very interesting book. If you read it, you'll notice a heightened degree of awareness of these areas playing out, and that can be very helpful in various ways. So today we're focusing more on authority and social proof and relating it over to personal atmosphere, as William Walker Atkinson shared. And speaking of which, we discussed recently in a video how he classified suggestions into 5 classes of suggestions. If you haven't seen it, I'll link in the description to it. Now, one of the classes of suggestions he brought up was the suggestion of authority, where he defines it as follows. He says, this form of suggestion manifests along the lines of impression and induction, respectively. That is to say, suggestion by authority manifests both in the positive authoritative statements directed to the point, and also by the spoken or written statements made by those who speak or write with an air of authority. It is a peculiarity of the human mind that is inclined to listen with respect and credence to the words, written or spoken, of persons who assume the air of authority and knowledge. So one may hold many beliefs that are what we call subconscious criteria, which causes them to perceive a person as authoritative. And this can be helpful, yet at times it may not be. So for example, when it comes to personal atmosphere, which is related to the mental state, at any moment you are embodying a state of mind. This state of mind plays out automatically as what you communicate, don't communicate, do or don't do, etc. And since others reflect our state, it also determines how they show up when we're relating with them. Now, if a person who is considered to be authoritative communicates something, or does not communicate something, does something, or does not do something, this is even down to body language, subcommunication, etc. One may suggest something to themselves in relation to these appearances and cause themselves to enter into another state, whether it be ideal or not. The same is to be said when it comes to social proof. If a group of people seem to agree upon something, one may suggest something to themselves by that appearance, which causes them to enter into another state, whether it be ideal or not. So now let's go back to the beginning. William Walker Atkinson said, "You will readily see from what has been said that the personal atmosphere of persons depends upon the character of their mental states and are the result of the mental currents emanating from them. So in relation to a perceived authoritative figure or a group, and based on a belief within, assigning authority or social proof as governance over one's own state in relation to how they appear causes the person to enter into another state, which results in the effects of their personal atmosphere being altered. Then let's say they leave the environment and enter into a new one. If they're not aware that they are in a different state, they remain having the same personal atmosphere around them, which is a result of a state they brought themselves into as a result of what they imagined, or we could say felt as real in relation to the perceived authoritative figures or social proof. It could be one or another or both. So again, it is not the actual figure. It was what the individual was imagining in relation to the appearance that brought them into another state. This is the key distinction that I would like to emphasize. Now, if this is a challenge for someone where they notice this is happening too frequently, they keep going into a different state undesirably, it is important to bring awareness to the beliefs that have been identified with that causes this to happen and release identification with them. For example, let's look at some beliefs and some meta-beliefs, which are beliefs about beliefs, which make up a belief tree, or we could call a belief system. Let's say a person had a positive personal atmosphere, one where they felt comfortable being how they wanted to be. Then based on what they interpreted, or we could say imagine, and from identifying with that imaginal activity by which they thought they were not accepted or good enough, they brought themselves into that state, and thus their personal atmosphere is experienced accordingly, and others around them reflect accordingly. Now, they might also hold a meta-belief in relation to the perceived authoritative figure, such as the authoritative figure knows more about them than they do themselves about themselves, or a group of people know more about themselves than they do. And so based on what is said or did, or more accurately put, what is imagined and accepted as real as to what they said or did, they believe that they are not accepted or good enough. So we found a few beliefs here. One that says, based on whatever XYZ condition, they're not good enough or not accepted. Then we also have the belief of, based on this authoritative figure, or based on this social proof, which again, to be very specific, their imaginings in relation to what they communicated or subcommunicated, they believe they're not good enough or accepted. Now, to further uncover meta-beliefs, perhaps these beliefs brought to the attention of the person experiencing the identification to these beliefs, in which they respond, they've always been this way, or they find it hard to not believe what this authoritative figure or this group communicates. Now, more beliefs are brought to awareness, which includes them believing that they were always like this and they find it hard to change. So we see here a list of beliefs and meta-beliefs that are part of the person's self-image. So they then have a few choices. Number one, to release identification to those beliefs, they could say the following autosuggestion to themselves. They can say, I know myself more than anyone else, and I realize this more so each day, from which I am easily able to discern what I am imagining around those that I consider authoritative and around people in general. I accept myself unconditionally and allow myself to be how I truly desire to be now. This appears easier each day as I see it everywhere I go in all interactions with all people. This autosuggestion would release identification to those beliefs in question, and they would find it easier to remain in their ideal state of mind, regardless of what is communicated or subcommunicated, which then their ideal personal atmosphere remains the same. And they now know what's going on, and they don't allow themselves, as mentioned in the beginning, to be self-gaslighted by past beliefs. Now, another way is to be aware, like we discussed in Sunday's video, which I'll link to in the description, of how you feel prior and during the interaction, and remain in that feeling by noticing the point if the feeling starts to change, which indicates where one could identify with those past beliefs and not identify with them. And as a result of not identifying with those past beliefs, which can show up as imaginal activity prior to identification, or which seems to be changing the feeling, which reveals beyond visual cues on the mind's eye that the state is changing, they remain in their ideal state as a result. As a person practices one or both, whatever is applicable to the situation, they will find that they'll be able to maintain their personal atmosphere, and they will notice others around them reflecting that state. Now, this brings us to 2 points which I may consider further elaborating upon in upcoming videos, yet we've discussed it before and it's worth mentioning again. Number 1, it's not required to change all your beliefs. We are only interested in releasing identification to the beliefs that are not true with how we truly desire to be. If you don't know how to identify the beliefs like I did here, it's fine. You can remain in that ideal feeling. It will change the beliefs to be true to that feeling. If you can identify the beliefs and release identification to them via autosuggestion, you'll find it easier, as this is what autosuggestions are in context of the way we discuss it when it comes to relating with others and being how you truly desire to be. They are acknowledgments that you are already like that, how you desire to be now, like you would get acknowledgement from a friend or a mentor or something like that. Only here you're being your own best friend and mentor, which is very powerful. And by doing so, you can also easily see if you're unnecessarily or in an unhelpful way identifying with any of these beliefs here or whatever beliefs. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an autosuggestion to further encourage. You could say, I'm aware of what I once believed in relation to any appearances, and from this awareness, I remain true with how I desire to be. Others show up and reflect my state wherever I go, which is ideal now. I'm able to remain in feeling as real now, how I desire to be, where others show up to reveal that feeling within me in a mutually beneficial, harmonious, and loving way. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.